Hi, this is Sapnil Bhartia. I'm here in the hotel room to cover Spinnaker Summit in Seattle, and this morning I just got a news item that really made me very, very happy. I have been saying this for a while. I got a lot of beating for saying that, but finally I'm good to see that it's happening. As you all know, that Microsoft has joined OIN. OIN is an Open Invention Network that was created something around 2005 by companies like IBM, Red Hat, and the whole idea was to create a patent pool so that the partner companies cannot use those patents against each other. At the same time, people can get access to those patents on royalty basis. The whole idea was to end a potential patent nuclear war. Actually, we did see that war during the height of Android, Oracle and Apple lawsuits, where they were using a lot of patents against each other to dominate the market. But that has subsided. One of the biggest player in that space used to be Microsoft. If you recall, Microsoft's Brad Smith, he was a legal counsel back then, and he used to post aggressive blogs about how Microsoft has signed another patent deal with another Linux vendor, and that used to upset a lot of Linux and open source people. But things changed, and now I see Microsoft is a very good open source citizen. I've been saying that ever since there was a leadership change at Microsoft when Satya Nadella took over the helm or leadership of Microsoft. We saw a new Microsoft, and I used to call it, not me, a lot of people used to call it a new Microsoft, and there was a reason. First of all, Microsoft had been doing open source for a very long time. I wrote stories on CIO.com where I tracked all the way back to I think 2004, where they had been releasing open source projects on a regular basis. But those efforts were at lower level, at developer level. Open source was not part of high level strategy or business strategy or part of corporate strategy. That changed, and I think there are a couple of factors that led to that change, and I want to touch upon those factors before I go into the whole OIN thing. The number one factor, which I think is leadership change. Under Satya Nadella, he recognized the changing market dynamics where things were moving in a totally different direction. It was all cloud and mobile, and he identified that, and the Microsoft switched its focus. Second was the rise of Azure as one of the most powerful platforms within Microsoft. And as you all know, I think 2 or 3 years ago when I talked to Microsoft, more than 50% virtual machines on Azure Cloud runs Linux. So Microsoft was interacting with a lot of customers who were using a lot of open source technologies. And as a company, they had two choices: either to help those customers do what they want to do by supporting whatever platform they were using, or tell them to go and do something else. But the new Microsoft chose to help those customers. So even in Azure, Microsoft actually ended up creating a switch that uses Linux. So now Microsoft had a lot of customers using Linux, and then to support those customers, of course, you need to have somewhat in-house capabilities to help those customers. So that led to interaction with a lot of open source communities, and then Microsoft acquired some companies with the rise of Kubernetes. So the third factor was that there was a bigger developer base within Microsoft that was pro open source. These people were open source friendly. They would be working on open source projects either in their free time or in the office hours. I talked to Microsoft, and they have very good policies that allow developers to contribute to those projects freely. And that's why you see that Microsoft is one of the biggest contributors on GitHub now. And actually they ended up acquiring GitHub. So I recall that I think it was either CoreOS Summit or Open Source Summit. It was some open source event, and some journalists and some friends, they created a birds of feather, and where I kind of got beaten up by a friend of mine, and he asked me that, why do you cover Microsoft? You cover open source, so why are you covering that? And my answer was threefold, basically, that when I look at a company that Open source doesn't simply mean that you have you are Red Hat or SUSE or Canonical. You can contribute to open source in a lot of different ways. And at that point, I saw that Microsoft was gradually evolving into a very good open source citizen. So that's why, whether it was a GitHub acquisition, or whether it was them joining the Linux Foundation, or whether it was them releasing Bash on Linux, while a lot of people, bloggers, were criticizing them that, hey, they're going to invade Linux, or they are buying a seat on Linux Foundation. But I continued to kind of defend them, because as somebody who covers open source, as somebody who believes in open source, I think that it's very important for us to welcome and encourage people who want to join the community. If you keep a hostile attitude towards those players, then you are actually making it hard for them to move to open source. So I really despise that religious or political kind of hostility that a lot of people, they want purity, that anyone beyond Red Hat, SUSE and Canonical, even Canonical gets beaten sometimes, Red Hat gets beaten sometimes by the same people, that beyond that anybody else cannot come here. It's the same kind of populism that you may see in the political landscape today, that, hey, this is America, everybody else is outsider, you cannot come here. So I have been kind of defending Microsoft for a very long time, and finally I'm good to see that now they have taken the last step, almost the last step that was needed for them to become a very good open source citizen. So I looked at it from 3 points of view. The number one was that, first of all, Microsoft started to release a lot of their own code as open source, whether it's Visual Studio Code, PowerShell, and a lot of, they're doing it gradually. I mean, you imagine a company which is like 30 or 40 years old, it will take a lot of time for their business decisions, legal team to release, and they have to decide what code makes sense for business. Still, they are a company who is there to make money, just like Red Hat or SUSE or Google, whatever. So they have to move gradually. They have been releasing a lot of their code into open source. The second is that they have been creating an even playing field for Linux. So instead of saying, hey, if you want to use it, you have to be a Microsoft user, that is not the case anymore. They are bringing a lot of Microsoft products to Linux platforms, so people who are using Linux can use those platforms. Yes, it is not for desktop Linux, because in my opinion that is still a niche and a small market. It will change in future, but when it comes to enterprise workload, whether it's MySQL or whatever big project, they are bringing everything to the Linux. At the same time, they are bringing Linux capabilities to Windows, so it doesn't really matter whether you're a Linux user or a Windows user, you can run your workload on the cloud. And that is what is great. There is no such vendor lock as it used to be. You can choose your platform and use it. And so those are the two puzzles. One is to release their code, second is to support platform, and third remaining piece was patents, because no matter how much work Microsoft was doing in the open source space, unless and until they assure the community that they will not use their patents against the community, there was a fear. That's why in my article in 2016 for CIO, I wrote that if Microsoft really loves Linux, if they really want to win people's heart, they should become a bit liberal when it comes to patents. They should join OIN, and that is what is happening now. But this is not a work that happened just yesterday. Companies which are as big as Microsoft, they don't make decisions overnight. So a lot of work has been going on internally. I mean, you have to go through legal, you have to go through business. I mean, it's a big company, so they have to make a lot of decisions before actually announcing it. So what is happening is that by joining OIN, Microsoft has not only told the wider open source community that we will not come after them, they actually bought more than, I don't know, what is the number? Let me just check, because I don't want to get wrong when it comes to numbers. Let me check my story that I just published, and here you go. So Microsoft has, how many patents are there they are giving to the OIN? Where is the number? So Microsoft bringing more than 60,000 patents to OIN. So all the member companies of OIN and anybody who can join OIN on a royalty basis will have access to these patents. These patents will not be used against any vendor, and that is incredible. That is amazing. So you may ask, why is Microsoft doing it? The answer lies in the questions that I posed earlier, and that was that despite all the work that they are doing in the open source space, there was still a bit of skepticism, and unless and until you have the trust and confidence of the wider community, you may not have the same kind of engagement. Though the fact is that almost every large open source community that I talk to, they all love Microsoft. All the work that Microsoft does, no matter who you talk to, everybody loves the work Microsoft is doing these days. There are some minor, very, I would say, peanut gallery in the desktop Linux community that do not understand this reality and they criticize it, and that's what I want to change, to educate them better. But almost all of the big open source communities that they realize how the real world works, they embraced all the work that Microsoft is doing. And this is really incredible, because now what you have is that there's one more big player in the market who has become a very good friend of open source, and that's what we want. We don't want a hostile Microsoft. We want a Microsoft that is helping Linux. And just look at their statement that that Microsoft wants to protect Linux and other open source projects through patents. This is incredible. And even more incredible than that is that, given the size and influence of Microsoft, I feel that this decision will actually encourage a lot of other companies who have been pure proprietary companies to embrace open source. They can see that if Microsoft can do it, they can do it too. So I think one of the biggest contribution Microsoft is making to the open source world is making other proprietary companies get comfortable with the whole idea of open source and patents not as a weapon of aggression. So I think that's a good move, and I think now we can all welcome Microsoft as a very good open source citizen. So Microsoft, first of all, thanks for doing this, and second, welcome to the club. You are now an open source vendor, or I may say open source player. Thank you.